Oh yeah.
Hello, Augusta. Hello, Georgia. And hello, wherever you are. This is Janice Allen Jackson, and I am proud to present another episode of the Local Matters podcast of Georgia. If you've not subscribed already, please do so that you can be notified when we post new episodes. We also ask you to follow our Facebook page, which is also titled the Local Matters Podcast of Georgia. As always, we're here to discuss topics that are important in our everyday lives so that you get more information, you feel more engaged, and you can also decide when it is that you need to take action by getting in touch with your local, state, or federal officials. Local Matters family, we are favored by a special treat today in the presence of Hawthorne Welcher Jr., also known as Hawk. How you doing today, Hawk?
I'm wonderful, wonderful. Just another sunny day in this lustrous world of Augusta, Georgia, city government and beyond. So ready to jump right into this conversation. So excited, sis, to finally be a part of just this infamous podcast.
Great to have you here. And you all listeners, you heard him refer to me as sis, from 2014, from the time we first met. I think we became big sister, little brother. So yeah, we still refer to each other in that way. Thank you so much for joining. We had a hard time coordinating schedules and everything, but glad we got a chance to do this because we are going to address a very important topic, not just in the Augusta community, but throughout the country, and that is affordable housing. It seems like finding an affordable place to live is a challenge for so many in our community. People are spending huge sums of money just to pay rent or pay a mortgage. And it just sometimes seems like it's just out of control. So talk about some of the reasons that housing is so expensive and some of the things that our local government here in Augusta is doing to address that you might not know about, because that's one of the other things I found out is people don't know all the programs that are available. But before we start talking about programs, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about you. I know everybody thinks they know a little bit about Hawthorne Welcher Jr., but you tell us the real story.
So I'm a legacy. I'm not that Hawthorne that can sing. So let me just first get that out the way. I always get asked that question, but I am junior, so definitely very, very proud of being from Augusta, Georgia, and went off to school, Morehouse College, finance degree. And I think at that time I wanted to be a part of something great upon graduation. Didn't really know exactly what that was at that time. Put my resume out several different places. It was this little authority over in Aiken at the Aiken Housing Authority. A gentleman by the name of Reginald Bonner said, "Hey, Hawthorne, I don't know you, but I know your parents. So I'm going to teach you everything I know about affordable housing." And I was like, housing? I'm a college kid, 23, so I'm coming out of college knowing everything, right? So I'm just like, housing has to be the most boringest thing ever, but I'm just going to do it until I figure out really what I want to do with my life. So got into it. Of course, public housing section, they learned those things, but then we quickly learned, and he said, "I'm going to teach you auto development." So got into development, started acquiring, rehabbing houses, was able to formulate budgets and performance. And I said, "Oh, this is really cool." Really putting a finance instrument degree to work. That's really not what got me. What really got me was the fact he said, "Get up one day," didn't know where we were going, and we actually went to a ribbon cutting for one of the families of the homes we had acquired and renovated to resell to her. I said, "You know what?" And to see the streams of joy coming out of her eyes, I said, "You know what? This is cool." I was a part of a team that really not only, behind the scenes, but in front of the scenes really truly made an impact. So stayed over in Aiken for 10 years, came back to Augusta in '08. Been with Augusta for 16 years. So came back to Augusta in '08 very quickly, assistant director. And then in 14, by the grace of God, it was a young lady at that time by Janice Allen Jackson, the name, who thought so much of me to give me an opportunity. So really been in this seat since December of 14. I don't know if you can believe it, almost 10 years.
Yeah.
It's been 10 years. So just for me, just having the ability to be able to be a community development servant. That's so how I describe myself. Whether it's Monday through Friday or Monday through Monday, I am a community development servant, and it's all about really impacting and transforming communities.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And as you talk about transformation of communities, that reminds me of one of your signature projects. You know, I go to church at Good Shepherd. Those of us who are in Augusta, if you know, I live in East Augusta. I go to church at Good Shepherd. So my route takes me straight through Twig Street whenever I go over to the church. So I get a chance to see some of the new housing that has been constructed in that area. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
I can, so I think just to back it up, you talk about the whole Twig Street corridor, which is the question you asked me. I think the bigger picture on that would be the entire revitalization of the urban core. And I think this is something that's going on around the country. I know we're going to get into affordable housing, what it is and what it's not. But when you start talking about urbanism and revitalization, it really, for me, really starts with the committal of city and counties. And I think with that, there was a commitment made by Augusta, Georgia, 2008, 2009, a commitment of 37.5 million, but that still they wanted that to yield a 4-to-1 ratio. And that included pretty much the recruitment of investors, the recruitment of developers from an infusion of cash and those things. But the Twig Street corridor is one of those corridors in which we indicated that we had enough site control. But I think the beautiful thing about Twig Street and the Twig Street corridor, for me, I think that is a HUD best practice. Why do I say that? I think it's a HUD best practice because a lot of people, Janice, it's a lot of people use these buzzwords, affordable housing and blight and abandonment. And a lot of people also use a buzzword when they say mixed use development. Well, Twig Street corridor is not a mixed use development, but it is a mixed income developmental corridor. Why do I say that? I say that because PowerPoint is a public housing development. Also, then you have the Johnson House, which is a historic restoration, but not only a historic restoration, the end use of it is there's Section 8 vouchering or tenancy going on there. Also, Twig Street corridor speaks to affordable housing development from a homeownership perspective. Twig Street corridor also speaks to workforce housing development, but also along with that, Twig Street corridor also speaks to the Department of Transportation, the infusion of $5 million for our road infrastructure, sidewalks, and street lighting. So that is a corridor that has actually been visited by a lot of our HUD officials as well as our state officials. So we're very, very proud of that corridor.
Beans. You talk about HUD, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and they provide a lot of the funding that makes those projects possible. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I can. I mean, a lot of people know the acronym HUD, so I'm glad that you spelled it out. And I think one thing that people think they know, but they really don't know in some aspects is actually how is this funding actually funneled in to cities and counties across the United States? Well, the money actually comes from, so Augusta, Georgia in itself is an entitlement city. It's a participating jurisdiction. So that means that we agree to participate in all of HUD's programs by being an entitlement city. And Augusta, Georgia is an entitlement city because of its population and other factors. What does that mean? So that actually means that Augusta, Georgia does not have to apply for HUD funding on an annual basis. Well, what happens is the funding is actually given and funneled and awarded to Augusta, Georgia, not to Hawthorne, not to Housing and Community Development Department. The city of Augusta, through its mayor and through its commission and other leadership, has designated Housing and Community Development Department to be the overseer of the funding to say, hey, you all understand the rules and the regulations, what's eligible, what's not eligible. And you also understand, this is the big kicker for me, you need to be able to create programs and keep these programs modern based on not only eligibility from a HUD perspective, but based on the priorities of the city at that time in that respective year. So with that, we get very innovative, very creative in regards to exactly how we use and how we provide different services. So hopefully we can get into some of the services and products that we're using that I'm really, really excited about here in 2024.
We will. We definitely will. Yes, that entitlement community, I'm glad you brought that up. I think you have to be a city over 50,000. Is that the
Yes.
criteria? And is there also a level of poverty that you have to have, or is it just the size?
No, it's also poverty. And
Okay.
this thing, HUD has this crazy algorithm, and like they never give you all the components algorithm is. But you're right, the whole poverty line as it speaks to that, because for the most part with your HUD funding, the greater percentage of it is for those people who are at 80% or below the area median income. So basically for a one person household in 2024, we can most of our services for a one person household, a person who makes right at about 48,000 a year or less, then we can help in some aspects. And HUD actually has a total household income calculator all the way up to an 8 person household.
Thank you so much for that. Which is to say that every community is not an entitlement community. We're in a special group when you get, over 50,000 in population. And the cities that are smaller, they have to go through the state to get HUD funds, whereas, cities like Augusta can get it directly in. I just want to make that point. As we talk about affordable housing, um, that's been a conversation throughout the country for the last few years, but particularly during after the pandemic, that the housing prices, while they were expensive, just seems like they shot through the roof. Um, what are some of the reasons that housing has become so expensive?
So before I touch on that, I want to go back to something that you talked about when we talked about the city of Augusta, actually. And I really want people to understand in Augusta, Georgia, how lucky and
Mhm.
fortunate we are to not have to apply for HUD funding. That helps out in so many ways. As HUD funding helps out when you start talking about affordable housing. It helps out when you start talking about your small business development. It helps out when we start talking about being able to infuse operating money for our nonprofits, to be able to provide services and housing for people who have HIV and AIDS, to be able to provide services and housing for people who are homeless. Why did I come back to that very quickly? Because it's not CSR related. You have persons in Columbia County who still have these needs. You have persons in part of Aiken County that have these needs, and there's not HUD funding that can actually go outside the border. So that's an issue in itself that hopefully at some point we can tackle. Now, when you start talking about why housing is really and why has it gotten really expensive, you just look at the average house sale right now in the United States. I think is right around 420,000. If you look at pretty much state of Georgia, you a little over 300,000. So if you just sort of look at that on an average, we know that most of our persons, or special population that we deal with are no longer close to that. So picture this. Let's just bring it close to home. Let's just talk about Laney Walker development. Of course, back in 2014, when you and I, just we're starting this journey, we were selling houses in Laney Walker, live over 100, 125, $130,000. Now there's an uptick on that. The average household, average 1,800, 1,800 square foot is right around $250,000, in Laney Walker. So how do you keep pace with that? And what has really happened? I think for me, you really go back to really to the margins. And I think when you go back to COVID, go back to 2019 and 2020, before that you had pretty much a robust construction market. But I think 2019, 2020, construction never really stopped, but general contractors sort of went away. They went away from the single family development, and the margins really were in multifamily or apartment development. So that's really what happened. So there were the margins. They can build same amount of time or a little longer, build apartment development, and then based on that, with people's jobs and how people came out of the economy, how people came out of job and those things, people wanted less house and they really wanted less overhead in those things, so they can build apartment development. So the margins were there because based on people were willing to pay a higher rent as opposed to trying to get approved for loans and those things. So coming out of that, the margins are still there from an apartment development. So you have some general contractors say, okay, well, if I got to go back to building single family housing and those things, the cost of lumber and all those things have always been the same. So there lies in for me pretty much the uptick in pretty much those profit and overhead lines. that we're seeing.
And you mentioned margin. That's one of those finance terms. Now explain that to the general population.
Okay, so basically, I'm sorry. So margins pretty much just from a profiteering, perspective to pretty much say, hey, if I build this house for $100,000 and I know I want to make, $40,000, and of course I got to sell it for $140,000. But if I put in the same amount of time, $100,000 per unit apartment development, but I know somebody's willing to pay instead of 40,000, they're willing to pay, I can get an extra 20. So I'm going to devote my time where the profit, the margin of the profit is a little higher cost per unit. So yeah.
There was more profit in it for a developer to do a multifamily as opposed to a single family development. Okay. Yeah. I heard a presentation from the Home Builders Association just this week. I was at Augusta Rotary Club, and our two speakers actually, one from the Realtors Association and one from the Home Builders Association. And I think the number they quoted was like the average price in Columbia County is like 375 or something just nuts like that. And even in Richmond County, it was well over 300. Wasn't quite that much, but it was still well over 300. And you start thinking, well, who can afford that?
Mm-hmm.
Because the average working person doesn't have that type of income, particularly if you're talking about somebody with a family. So you're not just looking at what they got to pay for rent. You got to look at what they have to pay for the rest of living
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
feeding children and activities and car payments and all this kind of stuff. And it seems like it's really priced out a lot of people. And you're absolutely right about Laney Walker houses. Yeah, we were selling around 125, 140. That's where the market was. So just in years, prices have crept up. Average price, I think, has crept up almost $100,000 in Richmond County, and about 100,000 in Columbia County, and then in Aiken County, which you referenced. I mean, that's really where the boom has been too. So there's more and more building there as well. So yeah, it's gotten crazy. Now, one of the things I would like to ask too, do you think the labor shortage has contributed to the home prices? Do you think that has anything to do with it?
I would say yes, most definitely. It's a labor shortage and it's a customer service shortage just across the country, period. I mean, people just really aren't working. And I see that in an uptick from, if I just take, some of our services from a rehab perspective. We used to have a long list of about, 10 general contractors. That probably has drawn it down to about 4. So based on that, and then a lot of times what I'm seeing is general contractors, do they really want to work, or don't they really work? Sometimes I see overbidding on purpose, just because, yeah, we're going to do it just off GP and just out of respect for you, but we really don't want that job. Or if you're going to make it worth our while, then we'll actually do it. So that's in a control situation. But what about pretty much just those GCs just on the open market, you know, who have the latitude to be able to just pretty much ring up whatever margin they feel like ringing up. So it's definitely an issue. I think what it does here in 2024, it makes pretty much the work, that we do here from a housing community development perspective, even more pertinent and mundane, because we've always been that one to sort of stand in the gap. And, in previous years, it really hadn't been that big of a deal. Yeah, you're providing the gap financing, for a person to be able to make this home affordable. But it's really, really, really now more relevant and prevalent that we really look at the max that we're providing. Is it keeping pace? Is it modern? Do we need to stay pat where we are? So that's another conversation that we can have as well.
Yeah. You mentioned a term. I'm in the definitions, and then we're gonna get to that. Workforce housing. What is workforce housing?
Yes. So, I think for me, workforce housing is that housing that, for me when you look at affordable housing. So affordable housing, let me just give it to you. I can give it to you from a numbers perspective. Affordable housing for me may be housing that you have in a gap right now of about 100 to about $150,000. So workforce housing, in my opinion, is that housing that is a tier up. So we're providing a little bit more housing from a volume standpoint, and so you've been looking at something about 175 to about 250. That's probably about workforce housing right now. But it's pretty much it's a signal call to say, hey, these persons have done everything necessary. These are persons, one house, two-person household. The engines are pretty strong. There's steady stabilization from a job perspective for years. There's steady stabilization from a revenue perspective. So they can afford a little bit more house, but at the same time, they still garner said assistance to be able to keep what's affordable.
Okay. Yeah. And those who are in need of workforce housing are people that what we consider average paying jobs. They need the help. And then affordable housing is also different. So workforce, affordable, and then very low income. So those are like three different areas, right? Three different things.
Yeah. So when you start talking about, just say a one person household, HUD definition says that affordable housing, you can help a person who has $48,000 a year or less. So then you go down to 50% of that. So somebody who is at about 24, 25,000 per year or below would what we consider by definition somebody who is Section 8ish. And then somebody who's at about 30%. So somebody who's making about 18 and 19,000 a year or below would be on that public housing or the project, as some people call them, that tier. So you have a 30%, a 50%, which is very, very low, and low income. And then you have what you have at the 80%. So that's sort of the world that we live in. One thing that I always try to tell persons in any situation, regardless of what's going on in life, let's stabilize you first from a housing perspective. And then one thing that I think is very important in our world is we don't need you to try to diagnose yourself. Similar to like when you go to the doctor and you think you know what's wrong, go to the doctor and let the doctor do what's necessary to do the complete assessment, ask you questions, and then come up with a diagnosis in regards to a plan for better improvement of health. So housing is really, really no different, where you have people try to diagnose themselves, but you don't really understand and know all the factors. Case in point, I'll give you, I'm not going to call this developer out, but years and years back, you had this developer come into all these different cities and counties across Georgia and the Southeast, and they were building these massive homes, and they were selling these homes to so many people. Like it goes back to the statement you made earlier. Well, a person can afford maybe the mortgage, but they can't really afford from an operating perspective really to live in that house. The Georgia Power bill, the water bill, the lawn care bill, the pest control bill, the food. So all of these things contribute. And so I say all that, if people are interested in home ownership, you're just interested in housing. There are things, Janice, that we call the front end ratios, and there are things that we call the back end ratios. Allow us to kind of assess and help diagnose for a better livability of housing in America.
Glad you use that phrase because a lot of times people will just assume that they don't qualify for any assistance, and chances are they just might.
That's right.
So, can you talk just a little bit about the various services that your office provides? I know we talked about some of the new housing construction, but there are a lot of other things that you all do at the Department of Housing and Community Development. So, if you could just sort of lay out the categories of services, I think that would be real helpful.
So, the first thing I'll say is, Housing and Community Development Department, we are not the housing authority. We're not the housing authority.
Thanks for clarifying that. Thanks for clarifying that. Y'all, I'm glad you said that because there is the Augusta Housing Authority. Their offices are over on Walton Way near Peabody
Yes.
Apartments. And then there's Augusta Housing and Community Development, and y'all are on Fenwick Street. So, yeah, please. Thanks for clarifying that. Go right ahead.
So, the first thing I'll say is out of the National Affordable Housing Act of 1934 and 1937, basically indicated that every major city in the United States must provide affordable housing in some aspects. Thus, when you come with the housing authorities being created to be sure that there is affordable housing from a public housing and a Section 8 perspective. So anything for the most part outside of public housing and Section 8 housing related, housing and community development department through Augusta, Georgia, we do. So I think I mentioned it before, but let me just sort of run it down real quick and I come back to the housing piece. So this funding comes in from HUD as well as other funding. So we create program and services that are beneficial to your nonprofits, those nonprofits who are providing services for the good of the community. We're able to provide them $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year to sort of help with operations. Also, those small business owners who need pretty much a seed. In some aspects, we're able to provide some of that seed funding that they can use to be able to garner a line of credit. We're also able to help some of our seniors who've been in their house for 20, 25, 30 years, aren't necessarily looking for new home ownership, and then they're on fixed incomes. So a lot of their income that they're using, they have to make a decision to buy their medicine, to buy food. So trying to talk about keeping up pretty much with those house deficiencies, that's not even on the list. So we have rehab programs. We're able to provide funding for a lot of our seniors. Also, something that people don't want to talk about is housing opportunities for persons with AIDS. So those persons who've been afflicted with HIV and AIDS, we have funding to be able to provide services as well as housing for persons who have been afflicted with HIV and AIDS. Our homelessness, those persons who are considered homeless, we have funding to be able to provide services and housing. Now, this is a kicker when you start talking about homelessness. A person who's on the verge of being evicted would also be considered homeless. So we have funding where we're able to prevent them from actually, in some instances, being able to be evicted. Now, coming back to the housing piece, some of the products that we have from a housing and home ownership perspective, we provide down payment and closing cost assistance. And I think that is really, 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 really important, especially in this day and age. So case in point, if a person's looking to buy a home for $150,000, or let's take it up for $200,000, and based on their income and their credit, they can only qualify for $175,000, $180,000. Why should this family be penalized when they've done everything that they're supposed to do? And in a market where 5, 6, 7 years ago, that home would have been appraised for 175 or 180, but based on the times of where we are now, it's the same type house, same 16, 1700 square foot home, nothing different. It's just the economies of scale and our economy as a whole across the country. Based on that, this home has risen $25,000 to $30,000 above. So based on that, we're able to give this family $25,000 to $20,000 in the form of a second mortgage, down payment, and closing cost assistance. Now, this is the kicker, Janice. It's not a loan. It's not a loan. It's not a loan in which there's a repayment. It's not a loan wherein we're charging interest, because at the end of the day, we are providing affordable housing and workforce housing. But what it is a non-amortizing loan that stays on the house for a period of 5 years, with 20% of whatever the committal or give that we give is forgiven each year for a period of 5 years. So if the homeowner stays in the house for a period of 5 years, if they're looking to sell at that time, they owe the city nothing. If they stay in the house for 2 years and they want to sell, then 40% is forgiven. So 60% of that money has to be repaid back at the sale. So that's sort of how that instrument works. One of the things I think that's very, very prevalent of why that's important, we're really looking at money and how to use money as a tool. So let me just start right there before I go any further.
Yeah, you are reminding me of the phrase that you taught me. And yes, y'all, just because you are supervising somebody doesn't mean you can't learn from them. So I learned all sorts of things from the people that worked in the organization and reported to me. And one of your lines was, and still is, I believe, is affordable housing is not what you build, it is what you finance. Because people would be looking at the house and say, well, that's supposed to be affordable housing. How is that affordable housing? Because it's a nice, new, well-appointed house, through the houses I would see, these are places that anybody should be happy to live because of the quality of what's there. And people will have a hard time thinking of that as being affordable, but that is because the city was offsetting some of those expenses through the down payment assistance program that you just talked about, right? So if somebody wants or needs down payment assistance, what's the process? What do they need to do to find out if they can qualify?
So process is just simply call 706-821-1797 and ask for manager Lysandra Corley. Or if you can't remember that name, then simply just call the 706-821-1797 and just indicate to the receptionist that you're interested in home ownership. And then we'll actually take it from there.
Okay. All right. Down payment assistance program only available if somebody is moving into one of your houses, or can they get it if they're moving someplace else?
So it's if you're buying a house in Augusta, Richmond County, then there is down payment assistance for you if you qualify from an income standpoint. Now, the amount may vary, but for the most part, if you're buying a house within the boundaries of Augusta, Richmond County, and you qualify income wise, then you potentially can be available for down payment assistance.
Let's talk some about rehab because we know people, you made mention of seniors who are up against it, and they on limited incomes, and maybe in a situation where a spouse has passed away, resources just not there for them to do major repairs on a house. And everybody knows if you got a house, you got to maintain it. If you don't maintain it, it falls apart on you, literally. So talk a little bit about the process of getting assistance for rehab.
So I think rehabilitation, that's probably one of the most popular programs that we've had. I've just seen in this industry as a whole, for the obvious reasons as we indicated. I think one of the things that we cannot, that you were taught and that I was taught was you always got to remember basically where you come from. So in this world of being innovative and creative and deal structuring and creating these metropolis mixed use type development engine spaceships that sort of take care of community. Community is really, in my opinion, really on the backs of our seniors and our Goldens. So based on that, I think rehabilitation is something that has been here and is something that, in my opinion, that will definitely keep to stay. Why is it important? So you have different rehabilitation programs that we have here. We have an emergency rehabilitation program that speaks to up to $7,500. It's 100 degrees. It's 9,500 degrees outside. We don't need anybody sitting in property where there is no central heating and air. So based on that, if it's an emergency, a senior can apply, or a person can apply for funding to be able to, for one time, whether we're talking about HVAC, whether we're talking about electrical or plumbing specific to one emergency. Then we also have a homeowner rehabilitation program that speaks up to about $40,000. The process is similar to anything. If there is a person or a senior and you're interested in home rehab, say, hey, there's some deficiencies to my home. Process is call that 706-821-1797 number. And then typically what we do is doing a complete assessment. We send an inspector out. The inspector will go from front door to back door to write down everything that it takes to bring the house up to code. So, there is a possibility where we can look at, now keep in mind, it is a rehabilitation program. It is not an HGTV renovation program. And I think that's where we run into some of the issues. It's not for jacuzzi, hot tubs, and for big flat screen TVs. It's for those deficiencies, the electrical, the plumbing, the roofing, the foundation, the windows, the doors. So I want to be clear on that because the city of Augusta is here to help, but we're not here to help to get you on HGTV in a grand.
It's taking care of those basic needs. Is energy efficiency a part of that too?
It is, and I think here in 2024, one of the things that we are looking at, because we're looking at going to more weatherization. To your point, going to weatherization, and why is that important? Because based on the amount of funding that we actually receive, we're having to really look at, how we scale back this rehabilitation program. back in 2010 or 2005, I was able to take $20,000 and actually go do a complete rehabilitation, of a home, 1,200, 1,300 square foot home. Well, that same home now, $20,000 in 25 and 2010, that's $45,000 right now. So based on that, we're looking at how do we modernize this program where we look to more efficiency weatherization type of methods to sort of keep pace to say, hey, we still want to help in some way, but the way that we used to help, we just can't do that right now in 2024.
And is that to say that the HUD allocations are not keeping up with the cost of doing business anymore?
That is correct. Your HUD allocations are still flat. They flat,
Okay.
flat. They have not really changed that much since you were here. So to that point, we have to be more innovative and creative in regards to exactly how we're using this funding as a tool. And I think from an affordable perspective, I'm not really we're looking more at those developers at housing sales where I'm willing to infuse funding into a project to construct, knowing I'm going to get the money back out in 4 months. Now I can take the money and continue using it as an engine and as a tool. So just have to be innovative. But HUD is HUD.
Yeah, HUD is HUD. And what I was thinking of, since this is what we talk about here on Local Matters, is maybe we as citizens need to lean on the U.S. representatives and U.S. senators to say, hey, can you put more funding into HUD programs? Because the cost of these rehabs, the cost of new construction, all of that has gone up. So,
yeah, I agree. And it's a balance, it's a balance there. Then there's also a balance locally. I think one of the things is, and I don't even want to step on that, but it's just, locally sometimes, it's a fight. It's a fight from Washington to Atlanta down to local.
mhm.
Everybody needs to be infusing and committing, so, that's happening in some aspects, it's not. So we just try to balance the best that we can. In some aspects, it's fun. And even to the point where you're receiving this public information, a little under $2 million in CDBG funding. So it's the same funding. Do you use it for rehabilitation, or do you come over here and use it for economic development needs to be able to recruit and to buy assets, to be able to create jobs and bring restaurants and other food services into areas that you're revitalizing? It's the same money, so you have to make a determination in regards to what's the highest and best use.
Thanks for explaining that as well. Want to ask you this question. We talked about the nuts and bolts of programs. We've defined some of the terms that people heard and maybe didn't understand what they meant. If you look back over this whole career in housing and community development, tell me what some of the most rewarding projects that you've been involved with. What makes you feel good at the end of the day when you look back over this career in building better communities?
So I think it's really three things. The first thing is I'm gonna start with the people. So I'll start with people. I've been very, very, there's a lot of, so I think for me in this life, if we get through this life and we really understand what our true purpose is, then I think we found that thing that we'll do for free. So one of the first things I think is important is having the ability or opportunity, because of opportunities given to me, to be able to build skill sets of some individuals. Case in point, your director of planning and development sort of came under my tutelage. Your land bank director came under my tutelage. There was a coordinator from me that now works in the HUD in Washington, D.C.
She just got a promotion.
She
I
did.
saw that on LinkedIn. She just got a promotion.
Persons who supervisor here who left and worked for Community Foundation, and a manager here who left and works in the middle. So there's so many. So for me is knowing that the skill sets that I've been able to work with other partners and put them in positions where now they're colleagues, and in some instances they're overseeing some of the work that we do. That's probably the most rewarding. I think the second had to be, and this, where I almost got fired 3 or 4 times for the belief of what Beacon Station was and what it is. Yes, economic development. Yes, a multi-family market rate development, but it's more than that. It was just an economic stimulant that we needed on quote unquote our side of the railroad tracks. It was a belief, and it was just a belief in what that was. And so for me, it will ever be stamped on what that is. And I think thirdly on that, taking along those lines, is the Lennox. The Lennox here on the Old Immaculate Conception site, something that we share. You know, who would have known when it was in first and second grade on those hallowed grounds that we'll have the capability to be able to come back and make those grounds hallowed again by being able to provide affordable housing on a main street where we're able to bring a couple of restaurants that hopefully we'll have an announcement soon and be able to bring 7 units of affordable housing. So those are some of the trophies from my perspective, where for me, it's all about allowing others to tell your stories. So those would be a couple of trophies that I could point to immediately.
And yeah, we, for the benefit of our listeners, we definitely share in the first two. Those first two, I am extraordinarily proud of the people that you make reference to and the fact that they have been able to move up. I was just having a conversation. In fact, my previous guest was Dr. Jermaine Worrell at Augusta Tech. And before we got started in the conversation that was on air, we talked about how it is wrong for any supervisor to try to hold people back when they have an opportunity to move on and do something bigger and better. But I have seen it time and time again. It's like somebody's mad because somebody found another job. I'm like, what are you mad about? You know, at the
Right.
end of the day, they are in a better position to take care of themselves and their families. And it makes you look good that you hired somebody that somebody else wants.
That's correct.
So yeah, I definitely, and some of the people that you reference, probably within the last month or two, I've talked to or interacted with 3 or 4 of them. And I feel good every time to say, hey, this is somebody that was in our organization.
Right.
That means that we pick well to begin with,
That's
that, we pick people with good skill sets, and we were able to nurture those skill sets so that they could go out and do bigger and better things in other organizations. So definitely sharing that one. The second one, I'm so happy that you pointed out the Beacon Station project. You said you almost lost your job. I mean, I want you all as listeners, you might not have a full grasp on this, but basically, when you are the staff working for a group of elected officials, it is your responsibility to make sound recommendations to them in your area. This one was coming out of your area, had been talked about forever. And as soon as you described the project and the objectives of the project to me, I was like, yeah, this is the right thing to do. We need to do this. I wound up feeling at times that we were in a foxhole together to make it happen.
right.
People talk about building relationships with people when they're at war. It's nothing like being in a foxhole with somebody, trying to reach the same objectives and having to explain, explore, make sure you shape this in a way that's most advantageous for the city. Because I think at the end of the day, there was just some fear that the city was somehow going to lose with this.
Right.
So I remember one day we were in my conference room for probably an hour and a half with Commissioner Sias, with him asking every single question possible about how this thing could fail. And
I
you had an
remember.
answer. You had an
I,
answer for every question he asked. But there was just a lot of fear, and we had to address those fears to make sure people understood that this could truly be a win-win for everybody in our community. And I don't remember the exact vote. I think, did it wind up being maybe 7 yeses?
it was sick. We teetered. It was
Was it
sick.
6? It was 6?
Yep.
Okay, we didn't even get to
Yep.
7.
Yep.
And it was one of the oddest coalitions that we ever had in terms of, typically there's some folks you depend on voting together. They vote together on certain items. This was a very unusual coalition. I mean, it was 6 people that never vote together.
Yep.
but but it happened. But it happened. And within 3 or 4 years of when it went up, it was sold.
It was
So
so.
uh-huh.
And in Augusta, Georgia, multifamily development now in Augusta, Georgia, downtown is just robust.
Yeah, we were being asked questions like, well, who's going to live there? I don't know if folks are going to live there. And I would say, look, you've got all those medical students over there, all those dental students. This, and for y'all who don't know, this project is directly across the street from the dental school. They're on Wrightsboro Road, and 221 units, 226, I can't remember, somewhere in there. And
Yep, 221 market rate units, 1, 2, 3 bedrooms. Of course, it was a $32 million deal. Of course, 26 million came from Augusta, and then we got the infusion pretty much of Columbia residential at that time. And to your point, open the door. It was funny because we opened the doors right during COVID. So open doors right during COVID, but based on the vacancy rates and those things, it sold, as you indicated, within a year and a half to a developer out in Miami for over 50 million. So, city received his money back and the rest is history.
So, sister, and we partner with a developer that has done this over and over again, which is why I wasn't too worried about it. Because I'm like, this developer has done this in several other cities, and it makes so much sense since you're directly across the street from the Medical College of Georgia. I had found out from talking to some folks at the university that a lot of the lab researchers and students and stuff, they come in from other countries. They don't have driver's licenses. It makes all the sense in the world for them to live in close proximity to the campus like that. So in my head and my heart, I knew this thing was going to work. And we would get voted down, and I would say, we're not going to give up. Let's keep going. Let's keep going. And eventually we got approved. So that is one of the things that I think I am most proud of in my entire career, is that we were able to pull that off for the benefit of the neighborhood there. And it's one of those things where, having lived in some other cities, it's one of those things I see that, this happens in larger cities throughout the country all the time. We can make this happen in Augusta. So yeah, I was really, really excited about that one. I passed by the Linux site a few days ago, and every time I pass by, there's just more stuff happening. In fact, I was at Monday afternoon, I passed by there. So that one's going up quickly too.
It is.
When is
Yeah.
it slated to open?
So it'll be August, September of next year. But it seems as though I think they're ahead of schedule. I think the biggest piece for me on that one is us staying true. We did truly turn that pivot from housing. And of course, that's a larger mixed use development, 4-story rooftop terrace. But I'm most proud about the 5,000 square foot of commercial on the bottom. And seems as though we're working preliminary on 2 different restaurants. And I'm just so proud and so happy for the Boulevard to be able, we've heard a lot about Gwinnett, and of course I hear it, we know it, but to be able to have the inkling to be able to potentially replicate that a little bit in some way, I think this is just going to do a lot, really, for the Boulevard itself, to be able to not only have the Hurley repopulating, but also bringing some type of eateries there, creating the jobs, some lounge type spots. I'm just excited about what that's going to start and catapult with some of the other assets that we have, the Lightfoot building, the C.T. Walker House, Penny Savings Bank, and especially what's coming over to the Armstrong Galleria.
So awesome. We just got a couple of minutes left. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners before we close out?
Well, just one. I just want to thank you, sis. Just thank you for always. We don't have to talk every day for you to be insightful and say, you might want to think about this. Send me a text of this here and there, and I wouldn't be where I am today, if it was not for you. So I may eventually got there in some other aspect, but I would not be sitting here today with the Augusta insignia behind my back if it had not been for you. So I just want to, give you your flowers right now and just tell you thank you and love you to death. And I want to continue to make you proud in so many different ways.
Thank you. That's so sweet. That is so sweet. Thank you so much. I appreciate you backing up the confidence that I placed in you. I was like, yeah, he can do it. Because, you have to have those discussions and you sit there and you think about it. And I said to myself, yeah, he can do this. He can do it. So it's been a great 10 years. I think, as you say that, scope of the development is beyond what people thought would happen. Because there were a lot of doubters that thought that, this would never get pulled off. So yeah, appreciate all of that work. Anytime you're in the Laney Walker Bethlehem corridor and you see those projects go up, listeners, you think about the Housing and Community Development Department under Hawthorne's leadership, and please encourage our mayor, commissioners, et cetera, to continue support the work in revitalizing a historic district in Augusta.
Thank you.